Yeah, hello everyone. Welcome to the first Querqy user group meeting. We thought that it's about time to learn who is using Querqy and get to know each other better. And we thought that MICES would be a good occasion to do this. So who are we? Quick round of introductions. So I'm Ronny Kriegler. I think you know me by now. I'm maintainer of Quirky and also started the project 7 years ago. Hand over to Paul.
Yeah, I'm Paul. I mainly work as a product owner for e-commerce search products, and in that context, I used Quirky heavily, and from there decided to contribute to Quirky and created the search management user interface, which is an application with which you can maintain rules for Quirky. And I pass the ball to Johannes.
Yeah, hi, I'm Johannes. I currently work for MediaMarkt Saturn Retail Group. Finally, I joined there 4 years ago, and first I did there was replacing a commercial search engine running there for about 10 years. So actually the search there has been grown to a product group right now. So we are now 3 teams there. And of course, we're using Quirky. So yeah.
Okay, so a quick look at the agenda today. So I start with a brief overview of the history of Quirky so that everyone knows how it came into place and also what problems it solved. Then we want to ask you, who are you? Are you using Quirky? What are you using it for? So start the discussion a bit. Also, what is interesting you? What interests you in Quirky? And what's missing? Then we have a few short talks where some of us prepared to give a bit of a deeper insight of their experience with Quirky and their ideas about Quirky. Then Paul and I are going to share a bit of our maintainer perspective. Where are we as a project? How do we imagine the development? What should improve? Seen from a software development perspective, not necessarily from the feature perspective. And last but not least, we get a lot of questions about Quirky on the Slack and sometimes in emails and on Twitter and wherever. And we thought that would be a good occasion to do an Ask Me Anything. So whatever you wanted to know about Quirky could be asked here, and we might move over to spatial if we exceed our time. But let's see how fast we proceed. So a short history of Quirky. So basically, it's a query rewriting library and mainly used in e-commerce search, and but it's also applicable to other domains. But as this is an e-commerce search event, I think this is a great place where it fits in. We've put on this slide a number of brands and sites that are using Quirky, but there are quite a number of further sites. So on average, you get about 4,500 downloads per month. So we don't really know who uses it. And I think that's great for a software project. So it all started in 2014 when Paul and I were in a project where the task was to migrate an e-commerce platform to a new technology. And for search, there was this question, proprietary software or an open source software. And actually, some of you might have seen that slide already. At that time, the feature of the commercial search engines that was hard to replace using open source technologies was to something that allowed us to manage the query, to manage search at the query level. So have a UI where you would say, if that's the query, demote this document, promote that document that matches a certain criterion, further to the top, further to the bottom. Also deal with synonyms in a better way, especially for multi-term synonyms. And so in parts, Solr, Elasticsearch do have solutions for this, but in other parts, especially for the bonus and malus terms, not. We thought at the time, okay, let's create that library that does this, that solves this problem, and the UI to be implemented later. So this somehow led to the first version of Quirky. We didn't have the tooling for maintaining the rules, the type of rules that I just mentioned, but it got us started, and we put it on Apache 2 license, so make it easy to use in projects. And it led to a handful of projects, I would say, that were using Quirky, but not a lot of noise around it. So it was pretty quiet. An interesting point in time then was 2017, and I actually announced at a meetup in Washington, DC, you will soon see a release of Quirky for Elasticsearch, and mainly I had started a version for Elasticsearch, and I never released it. And the reason for that was that on the one hand side, at the time, I knew too little about Elasticsearch, but also it was quite difficult to get it into Elasticsearch. So the effort was given up, but the benefit of this was that the software design improved a lot. Yeah, so the separation of concerns became much clearer, and for instance, the abstraction of the request handling specific to that search engine, and also shaping out kind of an onion model that I'm going to show in a minute. That is all due to this this rewriting. And still today, I think I got this feedback from Johannes, who joined a bit later. It's quite nice to see certain abstractions being made and having a very clear separation of concerns in Quirky that helps us dealing with the complexities that query rewriting brings along. On the other hand, sometimes this abstraction makes it difficult for newbies to understand it, to understand what's going on, and more often than not, in a pull request, we have to make sure to keep up this separation of concerns. All right, so I mentioned that onion model, and basically I think this is the slide. I think I've shown this also many times. That's the slide that somehow gives an overview of the software design and the components of Quirky. So at the left-hand side, you can see what we say is Quirky core. So up to here, that's the core of the onion, so to say. And this is completely search engine independent. And this is where the query rewriting, more or less where the query rewriting happens. So what we do is we take the user input, parse it into an object model that is not a Lucene, Solr, or Elasticsearch object model, but a Quirky object model. So that represents the terms in the query, the clauses, and their combinations. Then we have this rewrite chain. So the rewrite chain is a list of query rewriters that manipulate the query. Yeah? And I think there's one query rewriter that somehow is what is somehow iconic for Quirky, because that's the query rewriter that implements those rewriting rules that I mentioned earlier in the context of commercial search engines, like boosts, query-dependent filters, and synonyms. But you should know there are other rewriters that come out of the box, rewriters that do decompounding, if you want, that deal with numerical units, units of measurement, and those that deal with the normalization, rule-based normalization of the input. And you can wrap your own and plug it in. So that's this component. Then the next component, the next skin of the onion is Lucene. So at this level, we create a Lucene query using a query builder, a Lucene query builder. And then the outer skin somehow plugs it into the search engine. So there's a query builder for Elasticsearch and a QParser plugin for Solr. And then these components take the request and pass it on to a controller. So the controller basically controls the request flow, and through this layer of abstraction, it gives the rewriters access to the request context. Yeah, and that's basically the model that was created at the time of this first attempt of writing an Elasticsearch rewriter. And you could add your next search engine to this because the abstraction would give you the guarantee that the rewriters would still work, except they depend on Lucene, but most of them don't. And what you would have to implement is something that plugs it into the search engine and abstracts the request context. Then in late 2017, early 2018, SMUI got started, the first release. So SMUI is a UI, user interface to maintain those rules. So under the hood, that's all configured in text files, but then that's not human readable and or maintainable. And to catch up with the commercial tools, we needed a user interface. Paul and I had an earlier story of trying to do this more semantically, using kind of an e-commerce knowledge graph and derive the rules from this. This failed horribly because it got too complex, but it also gave us a great starting point for UI. And SMUI was an important milestone for Quirky and the adoption of Quirky. So this enabled the use of Quirky in many more projects, and it also helped hardening Quirky a bit. In 2019, I would say things really started to take off. At the time in early 2019, we got a huge pull request from Asda Walmart Labs. So Asda is an online store or a grocery store in the UK. And they were in a situation that I would say is typical for Quirky. They migrated from a commercial search engine, so at this time from Endeca, to open source Solr. And again, they faced this issue of not having the right tools that the commercial search engine used to provide. But this time it was Endeca and not FactFinder. So that meant new features had to be implemented. And what they contributed was a lot to do with contextualization of rules. Yeah, so like for this tenant or under this category, I want to apply rules and I want to order the rules and filter them dependent on the context. And so it was a nice push for the feature development, but also for project maturity. So we really started software process with reviews. We moved to the Quirky namespace and started releasing to central control, more or less because the Walmart Labs guys forced us to do this. And I think that made perfect sense, and it helped us as a project. And at the end of 2019, there was the first release for Elasticsearch, so this time for real. And I think Elasticsearch again somehow helped us understand the concepts of our software architecture better. So I think for now, so after the release for Elasticsearch, we took some concepts we saw in Elasticsearch where we thought, oh, if we did it like this in Solr, it would be better. Yeah, so we changed the approach in Solr a bit, and I come back to this in a moment. And we saw an increasing number of projects that were using Quirky and together with SMUI. So also from this usage perspective and also project hardening perspective, it got more mature. So 2020, I think, was when things really took off. And some of you might have attended last year's talk on Chorus. So Chorus is an attempt to put together software tools, open source software tools for e-commerce search, and integrate them and give an example application how they could work together. And at the core of this software stack, which is a Docker image or comes as a Docker image, is Solr with an integrated Querqy and Smoothie. So you start Docker and it's all there. And then you get a number of tools that help you optimize search relevance, like Cupid, RRE, and there's also a version that has Querqy. So I think bringing the tools together and also bringing them together under this common umbrella was an important step. So Paul and I moved our projects from our own namespaces under GitHub to a common group, that's GitHub Quirky, and we created Querqy.org, the website, with an integrated documentation, and we started a Slack chat for the development. So I think this made a lot of sense, and we got a nice momentum out of this. And then I think I have to mention a lot of contributions by a number of companies, like MediaMarkt Saturn, but also Otto contributed a lot. We saw a number of paid projects. I think I can mention Digitech Galaxus in this context for Elasticsearch. So I think this is a great impetus, gave us a great momentum. And what we see increasingly is that this tool stack, this integrated tool stack, also works for companies that are not that large, that are not within the top 10 German e-commerce, but even companies that don't have a proper standing search team, but still need to maintain their search. Yeah. So, I get feedback like, now we see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to say. I think this is great to see that it really works in practice. Early this year, we released Querqy 5 for Solr, and this is, I think, a major break. And the first time we really broke something in Querqy in a positive sense. So what we changed is the rewriter deployment. So it all used to be configuration files, and if you uploaded the configuration, you had to reload your collection. And we gave Querqy a proper REST API to maintain your rewriters, and everything else happens under the hood. So the configuration is managed via Zookeeper and is propagated to the nodes via Zookeeper, and the configuration is updated under the hood without having to reload the core or the collection. So that means you can change your synonyms and your rules, hit deploy, call this API, and it's there. Yeah, so I think that's a great improvement, and it also hides all this complexity that we see in a Zookeeper, and also the rewriter. The use of rewriters becomes more flexible, so no longer do we need a static rewrite chain. And I think this is something that's kind of a feedback we got from Elasticsearch. Yeah, so that's basically a concept that we first applied in Elasticsearch, and now we're using it in Solr. Simply because Elasticsearch does not have a Solr config XML. Also, around the same time, we saw a lot of new useful features, I think. So the common rules rewriter, the one with all those merchandising rules, got a lot of extensions. So so now you can use Boolean expressions to specify your matching criteria for the input that triggers the rule. You can create rule templates, can weight synonyms. So a lot of new stuff. The decompounding, so that's a word break, decompound rewriter allows you to apply language-specific rules that go beyond just the juxtaposition of the two word parts. So a lot of new features. Rewriter logging has been improved. So when is the rewriter applied? We can log this better now. And also to point out the integration tests. So especially for Solar, you can now say, okay, we have this feature and now we try it out with all the Solar versions that we support. I think SMUI evolved along the same process somehow. And I want to point out features there that support merchandising as a process. Yeah, so more or less, SMUI supports one more rewriter. That's the token normalization besides the common rules. But I think what sticks out is it gets the feedback from the processes that we see and the teams. And now you can say, I add a comment to that rule, or I tag it, or I have a log of the changes, and I can always go back and see what happened. And that also gives me some indication of the impact that I can make using those rules. So I think it's pretty mature now. So what's next? So that's basically my perspective. I think some ideas will come up today, and maybe Johannes might not agree on some of these things, and maybe also not Paul. So I think for now, we need a bit more of a hardening for the new rewriter API. So in the old setup, you could take your configuration, test it out, and then just push it to Zookeeper, start your node. But now we need to start the node first, or the Solar Cloud first, and then push the rules, which is not optimal for all teams. So we need something to deploy the rules in advance and support this. Also, it's still painful to write your own custom rewriter. Though we see many interesting ideas for these rewriters, it's still hard to tackle. So I think we should support this better. And I think upcoming are new Solar and Lucene versions, and the two projects are split. So we probably have to deal with the implications. So do we split? So at the moment we are releasing Querqy for Solar and Lucene at the same time, but maybe we have to split these two components and give them different separate release cycles, especially if Elasticsearch releases faster than Solar. So that's basically, I think, yeah, that's basically my short history of Quirky. I hope you got a bit of an impression, more or less, what led to today and where we are. I understand that we didn't go deep down into the features, but that might be something you might ask later. And now I hand over to Johannes for this community discussion.
Yeah, thank you, René. Finally, René and me are, of course, also in the Slack. Actually, we also have a Slack channel for discussing things about Quirky in general. We have for devs but also for rather business users. But in general, we are very interested, of course, about feedback from the community, or finally, especially from the users. And this is why we thought it might be a nice idea to keep some time, or to have some time in this session to get feedback from you, and to understand how you are using Quirky actually, or simply to receive feedback. Yeah, what does work? What is surprising? What does not work? What is good? What is bad? And finally, as we are not too many people in this room, I think we're close to 20. I think something like this. We thought it might be also nice simply go top down in a list, that everyone says a little bit about I am using Quirky. Maybe if you're not using Quirky and if you don't want to say anything, you could also simply quickly write into the chat. Please don't mention me. But otherwise, yeah, actually that everyone has a chance to give feedback. Maybe we would start from the top of the list and go through the users, and that you can give some feedback. Yeah, we hope this is fine for you. But then let's start finally. Maybe ABAC01. Yeah, can you say something? Are you using Quirky?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Yeah.
So just curious.
What would make you use it?
Do you ask this now, everyone?
No. Okay, sorry. Okay.
No, I mean, it's an interesting approach, and I'd like to hear a bit more since, usually query writing is an interesting idea to work on, yeah.
All right, so let's continue. Alan, you have not written that you're not using it. So are you using Quirky? What is your feedback?
I have literally just logged in 30 seconds ago. So I've
okay, got it.
No context whatsoever, sorry.
All right. But Archita, are you using Quirky? Finally, you have been here longer. Am I pronouncing maybe the name in the wrong way, Archita?
You have to unmute yourself, Archita, if you're saying something.
No, I'm not using Quirky as of yet. What we are doing is trying to develop our own search engine. So I'm here just to look for ideas.
Okay, thanks. So Charan, Branislav has written they are not using it. Charan, are you using Quirky?
No, I'm also not using it.
Okay. Daniela, no, you have written it. Dominic, you're using Quirky, I guess, right?
Yes, we are. We're using Quirky on Elasticsearch, and we're using it mainly. I mean, for now, we use only the common rules rewriter, not more. And we are using it to implement a very lightweight search management process with the rules. Yeah, so we're using this feature and also the info logging. René mentioned it in his intro notes. This was a paid project. Yeah, so that we can kind of also get information about which rules were applied for what queries, because in Elasticsearch this was not yet possible, unlike Solr, I guess. So it's for the monitoring side. And I mean, we have plans to do more with Quirky. Certainly, we are looking into the WordPress rewriter soon, or we did already, and we are also looking into SMUI. That is not compatible yet to Elasticsearch, but if you want, I can share some insights about why I think it is, because there is a proof of concept local one that kind of does it already, just with some configuration.
Great.
Yeah, but that's not productive.
Let's do this later on. I think you've prepared a small talk.
Yeah.
Any additional feedback? Does something not work as expected, or some suggestions for improvement?
No, not yet. We are very happy with it. Yeah. Yes, definitely.
All right. So then let's continue. Gennady, are you using Quirky?
No.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we don't use.
Okay, fine. But the next one does. Jens, go ahead.
Yes, as you know, probably we are using it at Otto quite heavily for all kinds of usages. I was just looking into the code, what we are actually doing with it. So we are doing filtering, synonyms, boosting, all this kind of stuff in search management perspective. We have a specific setup that we are collecting, pre-processing the data offline and baking it into our images. That's maybe something to look at once the API is ready, the API solution is ready. And I just noticed maybe we could talk about two things. We are right now using it for decompounding as well, but more or less misusing it by using synonyms for it. So it's also an offline process, and we create synonyms by, okay, having two versions of tokens. So you have this combined token and the broken token, or tokens. So I think we should take a look into how the decompounding word breaking is done in Quirky. And something which we did recently is, and I think that's sort of a feature request or question, open question. What we need is, or what the business needs is, I would say it like that, query specific tracking. So once you alter the query, you want to know what this alteration meant. So it's more than logging, right? You need to give the information back via query processing. And we did this right now by using markers and decorations. So we invented artificial tokens, and then we get back this kind of information. So it's sort of a workaround, but it works pretty nice actually. Though it creates weird lists.
It's the way that Smui does it as well. By the way, it's the way that Smui would do it as well. You have some auto decorations being created for tracking.
Yeah. So maybe that's one part to think about. And I'm always curious, of course, to how to get this pre-processing idea even further, advance it further to okay, you know, annotate, understand, intent, kind of thing. But that's probably more, you know, a little bit farther away.
Okay, I think, sorry to interrupt. I think we can pick up on some of these ideas later on. Yeah, so I think that would be interesting to discuss.
So you mean we first iterate for all people and then we discuss the, okay, you have noted it, right?
Yeah.
All right, then let's continue with Joe. Joe has not written anything so far.
No, we don't use it actually.
No, we don't use Quirky. I'm just here learning about it. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, KG is also not, but Matthias Krüger has experience with Quirky.
Yes, I've used Quirky in a few projects. I think almost all of the rewriters that are available. I also did the first iteration of the decompounding rewriter. And I think my main interest is in learning a bit more about how Quirky has evolved, because I've not used the latest version. And yeah, features about making the search management process more understandable for the user, maybe. So I think that's my main interest, getting the search managers more insight into how their rules perform and what their changes actually resulted in reality. So yeah, that's my main interest.
Yeah, I think you already also discussed some additional features to the replace rewriter, if I remember correctly, right? So for having prefixes and suffixes at the same time for something like O'Reilly, for example.
Yeah, so there are some features that the current replace rewriter, which allows for normalizing queries, does not support yet. So for these, I've usually written a custom rewriter, which is, as Renee said, still a bit cumbersome. So there might be some better ways to do things. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Michael, are you using it?
Yes, as I wrote in the chat, Renee introduced the concept of Quirky Elastic for us.
Yeah.
But due to the current query pre-processing and so on, it does not really fit the needs of the customer I'm working for, but I'm tracking the project. So.
Okay, but I think the next one is a Quirky power user. Sebastian, go ahead.
Yeah, I use it all the time and try to tell every client he should use it or she. So yeah, I was also very early with using Quirky, I think, not from a developer perspective, but maintaining the rules. So I'm really happy where we got, or you guys got. Yeah, that's why I'm here today.
All right. Thank you. Sven already wrote. Wow, it's quite hard to pronounce that name. Teikiran. You using Quirky? Do you have feedback for us? No, Tracy already wrote, Uwe wrote. Vladimir, have you written? No, you have not written. Vladimir, you have feedback? All right, I think we anyway have to hurry a little bit. So yeah, I think a couple of topics came up. Maybe René, you start with the first.
Yes, so I think both Matthias and Jens somehow mentioned something about trackability. So I think Matthias related it, or both related it somehow to the management process, but I'm not quite sure from Jens' remarks whether they also want to use it for more data sciencey stuff, or whether it was more process related. So the one thing I'm interested in is, and Jens mentioned this, we have this concept of logging and using annotations for logging, but I didn't quite get where is this point where this is not enough for you. So what would be the specific extension you want to see in the tracking?
Oh, actually, it's related to what you were referring to. So we want to use the information we get by using the managed rules to really track on the query level. So if, for example, we applied a synonym, we want to know for what queries, of which queries synonyms have been used. And it's also related to experimentation, because once we have a system set up where one configuration uses a specific rewriter and the other doesn't, you need to know when it happened. And that's our primary use case for the implementation we did. So we wanted to know, okay, this new list, and we need to know whether it fired or not.
Okay, so let me share my screen. Why can't I share my screen? Okay. So maybe to include the others into the discussion. So I think what Jens is currently doing is we have a certain input, and then we have defined rules like the synonym rule here, and then we can define a log message. And I think at the moment you're putting into this log message some information also about the input, so that you know what was the input and maybe also the output, because otherwise only this log message would be logged, which is not very meaningful. And the way I understand is, understand you is you want to have more automation in this and maybe use the log message for something different, and somehow have a more automated process that says, okay, that's the input, or maybe a placeholder here, that's the input and that's the output, and just log the input and the output, and not having to create your own specific log messages here. Is this what I got? Did I get this right?
Yes, I think yes, but to be honest, I'm sure we didn't use the logging annotation, but I don't know why.
Okay, all right, okay. but it sounds like you solved the problem somehow. And I think this, you can use it, either use the log annotation, or if it's not there, it would use the ID, which is also up to you how you use it. I should point out, and maybe that's what you're also referring to, is this is specific, a logging specific to this rewriter. So there can also be other rewriters where you might also want to log. And I think I saw from some of you guys a logging for the replace rewriter that also has rules, and maybe that was part of it. So I think in terms of, yes, there is a certain framework and you can log, and later, so this in Solr, this would be returned as part of the response, whereas in Solr, whereas in Elasticsearch, it would go to a log file. And then you can run your analysis on this and combine it later on, maybe with a SMUI. SMUI can put IDs into the log, and then you can go back to the rule in SMUI and say, okay, that's the rule that was fired. Yeah, so it's not a very slim process. There's more than one component that needs to work properly to get all the information. So it needs to be applied at the rule, or needs to exist at the rule, and then you have to go around and track this and then put it into analytics. Yeah, so it's not the most straightforward, slim process, but you can track the rules that have been applied, or that were applied. All right. I think the other thing that Jens mentioned is decompounding. And maybe this is also some interesting information to share. We do have a solution for this as part of the so-called word break rewriter. And I think Uwe and I had a bit of a discussion about this yesterday on Spatial Chat. So what the word break rewriter does, so this is the Solr configuration, it looks very similar in Elasticsearch, is it uses a dictionary field. So that could be a copy field of your value or high value data, I would say, not your rubbish attribute with a lot of typos, if they have typos, but meaningful content copied into this one field. And then for decompounding, what we would do is we would go through all the splits we can make at this word and see if we get matches in that dictionary for each of the two parts. And if so, we add a synonym to the query that is just the broken up word. And different from the Solr analysis chain, where you can also do decompounding, this happens before you go to the analysis chain. So that means you can match one part of the term in one field and the other part in a second. Yeah, so like, I mean, German has a lot of compounds like Damenjacke, ladies jacket, that would be just one word. And so then you could say, I search for ladies in the gender age field, and Jacke, jacket, and let's say the category or product type field. And I think this is something, okay, what you would get using other solutions as well, somehow. And the new thing is, and that came up last year, is that you can say you have a specific morphology in the compound formation. And in German, the first word of the compound can take a specific form that only takes compounds. Like the German word, let's say Arbeitsjacke, so it's a work jacket. So it's basically the word Arbeit, work, and then an S is injected, and then you get jacket. And we have like 20, 40 forms of those ways of creating this compound form. Some involve umlauts and so on. And we are trying out all those possible rules that could modify the modifier word of this compound. Yeah, and so I think this gives you a bit more recall applying those rules. And I think what you are doing, Jens, is you're just using synonyms somehow from tracking, as I understand, to create that dictionary. And I think this can also be very powerful. And maybe a combination of the two might be a good way, because then you have the more rule-based stuff and also something that's observed from user behavior, which is probably more likely.
Yeah, and I think it has a different scope, right? So for example, if you're using synonyms for this, I expect that actually you use stuff that you, for example, also push into the suggester or something. So valid queries you know about, and mapping them to queries with a word break or something. And finally, this bases more or less on product data because it's pointing to a certain field for this on the search index. So I think we're anyway talking about two different approaches here.
Yeah. Okay. Just to complete this thought, so this has been implemented for German. There is a certain abstraction. So if someone needs this for, let's say, Dutch, I think they outcompound us. so let's go ahead and implement it for Dutch as well. Yeah, so that would be great. Okay, stop sharing my screen. I don't know where we are time-wise, so.
But I do. So when we go back to what we've learned, there was another interesting thing, Dominic, like you said that you gained some experiences with using Quirky for Elasticsearch, and that might be something that is interesting to other participants as well. As I think at least I see Sebastian and Tracy might have an interest in how Quirky is used for Elasticsearch. So maybe that's something worth to share here as well.
Yeah, certainly. I can do that. If this is of interest, I have prepared some high-level thoughts on some slides. I think I could use maybe 5 minutes or so to quickly show it, if you want.
Yeah, great. In the spotlight.
All right, so then I quickly share screen. Guess here. So do you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, so as I said, we are using Quirky with Elasticsearch and mainly for search management using common rules rewriter. So we have those rules you see here on the right side, like laptop, and then the synonym rule, which has a typo I see, notebook. And we don't, for the rules management of the files, I mean, first of all, Quirky as a plugin, that just works kind of out of the box for us. That's it. So that's kind of fine. I can't add anything more to it. That was pretty simple. And as for the rules management, which is basically the biggest question for us, because that involves the process in some ways, we for now use, I call it the walking skeleton, which is not SMUI, which would be the Rolls Royce, and we have a walking skeleton. And we just edit those rules text files that are committed to a Git repository. We use Azure, as you see here. So we just edit, like our search managers that are non-technical people, they can just edit these rules here directly and then commit it. And then we have some automation like on commit and on the merge into the master. Then it's kind of a pipeline trigger that then uploads it to Elasticsearch. So it's really a skeleton. That's just our context. And we have, I think what is a bit interesting is maybe SMUI has this concept of this pre-live testing. So you can like deploy your rules to another system, like a test system. And we don't do that. We do like testing of our rules. We call them draft rules. If we create a new rule for, let's say, a new synonym rule, we want to see what the impact is. We want to do this live in production, and we want to be quick. Also, we want to be really fast. So we want to try it, see, and then maybe change a bit. We want to tune it. So we create a draft rules text file and we also configure a draft rewriter, like a second one. And then we directly upload these draft rules into for this rewriter only. And then we just enable, like we did it with very simple URL parameters in our productive environment. This is, by the way, is not a real one, so you can't go and try. But so we have these parameters where we can just like select the rewriter we want to have. So I can check my own rules pretty quickly live, and nobody else really does. So it shouldn't really affect much. I think the benefit of this is that we don't need another test environment that is, I say, struggling hard to be like production, because you need to have the data there and all of that stuff. And you can also quickly create a no rules text and upload that or choose it to just completely disable the rules to see how would it look without any rules, because the more rules you have, the more likely that any of the rules kind of apply for this and you don't even know it for a certain query. So that's just something else that I find, or we found very, that kind of made life easy for us or for search managers, I think. And yeah, that works with Elasticsearch as well, of course. The monitoring also works with Elasticsearch. So Quirky at Elasticsearch couldn't, unlike Solr, I said it already, tell the caller, so your search API or wherever this call to Elastic kind of comes from, or to Quirky, and whether a rule has been applied or not. But there is this info logging feature where I think the link, I think it's the right one, Renee, but maybe it's not yet documented. So it's pretty new for Elastic.
Yeah, I think we only documented it for Solr, but not for Elastic yet. That's right. So
there is like, it's a bit, I think, of a complicated process all in all, that one can ask whether it's worth doing it. We said yes. So if you enable this new feature, then every search through Quirky with applied rules is tracking this info logging that we saw before, this log message. And of course, with Elasticsearch, this has to go somewhere else. So to some, Renee in Quirky calls it log sync. So somewhere, and we chose to do this on Elasticsearch on the node. So the system log there, it just goes in there, and then we configure logstash that has to be installed on all the nodes, that kind of tries to, in parallel, asynchronously push out these logs. And we use Google BigQuery as a source for our monitoring and reporting data. So this is quite a big pipeline for monitoring whether or not rules have been applied. And so far we're trying this productively. But I have to say, it feels a bit, it's a bit much. So I guess there's a lot of room for errors in there, in this whole pipeline. So far it works. And so that's the current state, what we do. And the outlook would be to go to use the Rolls-Royce to manage the rules. So SMUI, I can quickly show you what we did there so far. Officially, it's not supported, but it actually does support it. So I think I missed a picture here. Well, then I make maybe the slides here bigger. That doesn't fly either. That's a bit funny. Oh, anyways, you see, I think maybe I can show it here. The clue is when you see here, this is a rule with SMUI. So just ignore everything you see around it. The field here, synonym rule, or this would be if you want to, like, maybe I can show it live. That's much easier. So it happens to SMUI to run here in the background. So this is an Elasticsearch rule, raw rule kind of. So if we use Solr, SMUI is very nice and creates the fields to choose the field of the index of the document if you want like to boost, let's say, a certain brand name, so you have a nice selector here to choose the field brand, then also which of the brands, I think. So it's a bit, it kind of parses the raw Solr syntax. And in Elasticsearch, the trick here with SMUI was to just configure it in a way so we can add raw queries here, manually typed. So this is actually exactly what is in the rules txt file. So this is the whole approach, and then it works. And since SMUI does not seem to validate this too much, it kind of passes through. So it's work in progress, certainly. How you can do that if you want is to have this, you have this SMUI configuration here that you have to turn off, and then you get this field where you can put in the raw query. And once you have that, you can write rules for Elasticsearch. So this mainly goes for the up-down rules, right? Where you want to have maybe some raw query there. And for deployment, you just use a custom deployment script that's also SMUI configuration here. So you write your own deployment. You can do whatever. I mean, uploading it is pretty simple. Raw queries in SMUI, and the search managers usually are not such technical people, maybe. Have to be a bit aware that it has, of course, a much higher risk of human error. I guess that's why SMUI doesn't do it by default. And yeah, there is a discussion about the whole Elasticsearch support about it. Also, I linked here some issues on the open source project. Yeah, we tried, and I wanted to see what happens if I put in wrong queries, like raw queries, right? So here we have this raw query, and that should boost some certain product type ID, let's say, in Elasticsearch. And I wanted to know what happens if I upload the rule that comes like that. It's basically testing Quirky, actually, and not SMUI. So Quirky seems to just not execute the rule when there is problems. And I tested some syntax. I won't go through the details here, I think, but I tested kind of different things and seemed to be unproblematic. Rule was not executed, error was locked, and it seems to be not such a bad thing, even if you upload wrong stuff. But yes, you see this only at runtime, of course.
I think that's more solid in Elasticsearch than in Solr. I think in Solr you would get an exception, but it seems we've got that exception in Elasticsearch. Sorry for interrupting. Just for the others to know, Dominic is referring to rules in the language of the search engine. So you might remember this onion model, and that means for Quirky, this is at some stage transparent. Yeah, so you configure it, but it says, okay, this goes to the search engine, and you're responsible for that because I don't care about that specific syntax. It's not my syntax. And then what happens if you put an error into it? And it seems we are more robust in Elasticsearch there compared to Solr.
Yeah, probably went now way too far down in very short time. So sorry for that. Yeah. I think it's, yeah, that was a bit specific. And yeah, I think that was the thing about SMUI. One more thing that we see in SMUI that would be cool and we try to do is kind of this draft testing concept that I mentioned before in production, how to quickly test a rule. How would we do this with SMUI? So I mean, for now, we see there a very cool opportunity using these tags kind of in the rule of Quirky. We can annotate. So here, a rule with something. So here I chose draft and just my name. And then we would want to test this. So this would be a draft test rule. So what we would do is we just upload the whole, like all the rules, and then we annotate them in SMUI. This is the same concept here in the user interface. So draft for some rule, see, and Smooey generates then exactly these quirky rules texts, and we upload the whole together with all the others, and then we have a separate rewriter also that accepts these and is configured to with this JSON path filter feature that it has apparently to only apply those that have this draft annotation. So for us, this would be really cool. Using Smooey, quickly annotate the rule that I want to try it, upload it. I can try with the URL, and then I go back to Smooey and I remove this tag, and then I upload it again, and then it's productive. So this would be our workflow that that I hope that we can have soon.
Yeah, so as we are, I would like to mention something about this. As we are also heavy users of raw query, what you introduced before, actually, we have the same situation here, right? We do not want a search manager to be required to add annotations or raw query or whatever. We want to have it easier. So finally, what Quirky already covers is that actually you can create a template. You can even add their parameters to templates of queries with rules, and this somehow, I think it would be a very powerful and generic enhancement to include this also into Smooey, because then you can define your templates and I don't know, that dynamically create Smooey rules. So I think it's a bit that needs to be done, but this could be very powerful, because then the engineer can define the raw query, and the search manager only has to, or the parameters or whatever. And yeah, the search manager only needs to add the parameters to be used to render the template or the yeah. But this was the original idea when we introduced those template rules, that we make it very highly customizable.
Yeah, I think that's one of those, if I remember right, one of those links, the issues there on GitHub, there is a discussion, I think, ongoing about that, right, Johannes?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, good point. Well, first of all, thanks, Dominic, for sharing. I think this was very interesting, as you're kind of a pioneer, I think, in Elasticsearch when it comes to Quirky, at least for Smooey, you are. So that was really interesting. And I got a couple of questions that I would like to point out. So the first from Fruitic, which is it possible to use those draft rules for A/B testing of queries as well? So what is your perspective on that?
Never thought about this. To use this for A/B testing. I mean, we could, or at least in our setup, we for sure could. We could create A/B tests. A goes to rewriter A, B goes to rewriter B, and so forth. So it's not even draft rewrite these draft things. So, but we never. What would be the question to answer for such an experiment with?
I think it is whether a specific query performs better with certain rules, or if it works better without those rules. Kind of what, yeah.
I mean, what we did so far, we never A/B tested rules for reasons of traffic. So, I mean, having good numbers on A/B tests for one query, I guess that would be one of your top ones. And well, maybe, I mean, you can do it, I guess. So far, we did always just, that's why the monitoring, that's why the heavy investment into the info logging, and so the monitoring feedback loop. So we do time series tracking. So we create rules, and then we look at the metrics, go down, go up. So it's all time series related checks we do. Yeah. We never did yet A/B.
Yeah. Right, thanks. So continue with the next from Michael, which is, does the approach also work with nested documents, what you've shown?
with nested documents, I mean, we also use nested documents.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if I get the relation to the nested document yet. Maybe you need to help me a little bit.
I think it's Quirky somehow covering that. René, can you?
I think it's not a
give a perspective on that?
question, but maybe Michael can let us know what he meant.
Yeah, sorry. You're using the raw query, I understand, in SMUI, and I find it very difficult for a search manager to formulate a nested query in Elasticsearch as a raw query, because it's very elaborate and very much details which a search manager should not know about the internal structure. So it would be really helpful what you discussed before with the template mechanism to kind of translate this into an internal Elasticsearch representation from something more easy to read. Yeah, to manage. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I think we could even call the template from this type of input. I think it's for me it's somehow evident that we need to couple SMUI with templates, and so that everyone can create their template there, maybe render a bit of a UI widget so that you can fill in the variables. And as Michael puts it, and I think we are all aware of, creating queries using native syntax is a bit error prone for search managers. Yeah. And even in Solr, if you put quote around it and forget to close the quotes or something. So I think we can improve on this in SMUI, and I think for Elasticsearch, that's even more so because the query syntax there is JSON. Yeah. So.
I think it's a great outcome of this exercise or experiment that you've done, Dominic, especially regarding SMUI and an Elasticsearch ecosystem, that I would put it more generalized, that we need a way to abstract the syntax, the Elasticsearch specific syntax from the search manager. It's something that is not achievable by a person that is managing the search.
Yep.
And templates might be a solution to that. We should keep
this
that.
Is also, but this is also the case for Solr, because actually you need to consider a lot about query parsers and so on if you create those some a bit more complex raw queries in Solr.
Yeah.
So actually it's the same for Solr or Elasticsearch. It's not less complex in Solr.
Yeah, but I would disagree, as for at least in the context of I see SMUI, like 90% of the rules, they are not complex at all, and they can be parsed by that internal SMUI parser that is used to basically split up field and value. So I think that there is a solution for Solr, but there is no solution for Elasticsearch, and that is something that needs to be handled in the abstraction.
Yeah, I would like to add another thought on it. I agree kind of that this needs to be a more hardened or whatever you want to call it for the search managers not to make errors. I would like to separate the concerns of like breaking something. I think that's would be my concern number one, to unburden the search manager a bit from that. And then it's already good. If you have a small cycle of quick feedback loop on testing a new rule, then I think if the rule doesn't do what it's supposed to do, that's another thing, but at least it's syntactically fine. And then I think if your feedback loop is quick, the search manager or he or she can, I guess, quickly figure out whether or not something is wrong. And then maybe then you can put some more complexity on writing the rule, maybe with some syntax, I think, but it should for sure work or not crash anything.
Yeah.
And maybe that's easier to achieve. I guess that's my point here, that maybe SMUI could do that a bit easier. Just make sure that the syntax is kind of okay. without looking too much into it.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks, Dominic. I think maybe we can have another tab on how the deployment works for you, but you introduced the concept of using a custom script, which you can customize for SMUI deploying the routes to Elasticsearch. So thanks a lot. If there is no further question to you, I would like to hand over to you, Johannes, as I know you got some ideas prepared, I would say, for sharing in the community, and I'd love to have that as a starting point for a discussion.
Yeah, you see my screen?
Yes.
So as I already said, at MediaMarkt Saturn, we started building our own search engine about 3 or 4 years ago. And yeah, finally, the business logic becomes more and more, and we are more and more thinking in a direction about how we could abstract things a little bit better, and also how we could split up things across teams better. And this is why actually the topic of query rewriting, how this could be done outside of the search engine, is coming more and more into our discussion. So in general, what we see is that query rewriting is very central. So it's a very central component, and especially the restructuring of the query actually is very central. So for example, actually, really a lot of the business logic that needs to be implemented to achieve business goals somehow affects the rewriting, and somehow needs the query to be modified in a certain way, and to be modified in a generic certain way. I think Jens also mentioned a lot of things, how they somehow auto-process things offline and then put it into the rewriting using synonyms and so on. And I think also for the integration of machine learning algorithms that are not about re-ranking, this is quite crucial, because finally, if you think about spell correction, query relaxation, or things like that, and applying them not in a deterministic way by removing terms or by replacing terms or something, but rather in a probabilistic way that considers likelihoods, finally, it's very important to have a generic way to include results of these algorithms into the rewriting. And so in general, what we can conclude here is that the rewriting itself must be very dynamic and very flexible, because actually it's part of weekly deployments, it's part of weekly change. But anyway, so finally, the search engine on the other side is the most fragile component of a search solution, because it needs to handle the indexing and the querying at the same time. So, and especially hosting it on one's own actually consumes a lot of time, and actually even a lot of resources. And the even worse thing is that it also requires a lot of expertise, because people are the main challenge of everything. So in general, deployments are painful, and actually, so in general, you want to avoid change wherever possible in this part of the search engine. So, and this is where we run into a conflict. So on the one hand, we want to build the rewriting in a very dynamic and flexible way, but we do not want to change the search engine. So if we think about how the current architecture of query, actually René already mentioned a little bit of it. We have the Quirky core. Finally, it's totally agnostic of any search engine. Then we have Quirky Lucene. It's at least aware of Lucene. So, and then we have the abstraction between Quirky Solr and Quirky Elasticsearch. And client requests finally use the Solr API or the Search API in order to access Quirky as a plugin. So, and in general, if we are thinking about what we are doing here from a component perspective, is that Quirky core more or less covers the rewriting logic. Quirky Lucene is an own Lucene-based implementation. for proper matching and scoring. And finally, then we have the adapters that adapt Quirky Core and Quirky Lucene to the respective search engine, which is Quirky Core and Solr and Quirky Elasticsearch. So, and we need to change this a little bit if we want to do the rewriting outside of the search engine. So what does this mean, doing it outside of the search engine? It means that we can include the Quirky Core library somewhere in the search solution, and it must not be included or may not be included in it's not needed to be included in the search engine. So we can use it from anywhere, from some kind of service that is running on top of the search engine, for instance. And then we have an adapter here that adapts the rewritten query to a language, for example, Elasticsearch Query DSL, that the respective search engine understands. So finally, in the end, it's like the client sends a well-prepared JSON to Solr or Elasticsearch, and then finally the JSON takes care that the search engine is used in a way to meet the expectations based on the rewriting. So, but this means that actually the matching and the scoring needs to come out of the box, which is not a problem because Lucene is very flexible in how this is done. The bigger question is whether the APIs of the respective search engine are flexible enough to do so. So, and I have challenged this quite a long time, also together with René, because what we need in the end from an API there is something like this. We need to combine. We need to somehow component queries. We need the search engine to understand a nested JSON, a partially heavily nested JSON, to understand actually how should things be matched there. For here we have an example, the dishwasher written together, and here as a separated, for example, could be the result of the word break rewriter. So, and we, on the one hand, we must ensure that the matching is properly, which can be done by the formulation of those nested Boolean queries. And on the other hand, we must ensure that also the scoring is done properly, because, for example, here we have two terms that are matching in probably also two different fields. And here we have one term matching in one field. So we must take a decision whether we take the maximum of those two terms in order that scores are comparable across the Boolean clauses that we see here. So, and if we have a look at Solr and Elasticsearch, we can see that finally both have introduced some kind of query DSL, which can take some JSON. Finally, Solr also has this Boolean query parser, which can combine other query parsers in this kind of must-should Lucene typical Boolean logic. Elasticsearch finally has a very rich and very comprehensive query DSL. As I already mentioned, they both support this kind of Boolean approach. But there's one thing where Elasticsearch is much more powerful, and this is that Elasticsearch has much more capabilities to influence how the scoring should work at the end. And for example, there's the function score query in Elasticsearch, which ensures that you can modify a query in a way that you influence the scoring. So, and in the end, I did not find a proper way to do this in a comparable and productive, production-ready way in Solr. The query parsers are generally not really powerful enough for this. Maybe there is a way. Maybe there are even very hacky ways. I had some ideas, but finally, none of the things I found so far are production ready. So actually, query rewriting outside will remain being quite difficult if Solr is used. Nevertheless, as we have anyway Quirky as a plugin, I have wrote some first experimental implementation which considers Quirky to understand at least itself at the first step. So what does it mean? It means that we can add some kind of so we can use the Quirky core, for example, in a service that is running outside the search engine. We can use it to do the rewriting and to transform the client request into a way that Solr understands. So actually, the rewriting is done in Quirky core, and then finally you need to define some kind of query rewriting handler, and you do not have the rules in some kind of text file. You add them to a rewriter, which is kept in the client. So, and then actually you build the rewritten query, and finally out of the box Solr JSON query request that can be sent to Solr. And so this is the first step, but it's experimental because it's not running in production somewhere. But this at least would be a way that actually the deployments that need to be done to change the rewriting can be rather frequent on the client side and rather rare on the server or on the search engine side. Yeah, that's just a couple of ideas I wanted to share, and maybe there are other people who are interested.
All right, great. Thank you, Johannes. So there is a question from Sebastian. How does that work with the decompounding rewriter? So decompounding has to be somehow aware of the index, I thought. Basically.
Yeah, I'm not that sure about this. You know, actually, I'm not sure whether we actually need whether we actually need product data for this. So I think this, for example, could be supported by some kind of in-memory word break rewriter that has a similar implementation like the existing one, but does not consume product data, for example, but for example, query data. So actually at MediaMarkt, we already cover, I think, 98% of the word break and spell correction stuff via background pre-processing, and you simply use the query data. So normally, if you have a query with a word break, you normally have seen this query already without the word break, if that is the more proper one. So, and this is something, for example, you could also use them, and simply doing it in memory finally suggests the data is not comprehensive. Yeah, it's about megabytes, so it's not large amount of data we're talking here about. And the second is, of course, you can always do multiple requests. Yeah, so this is also possible. So in general, so for example, we are doing 2 requests. Yeah, if anyone wants to say something.
Yeah, so I think this somehow also leads to a more general question. I think it's not just about the decompound rewriter. So there can probably be rewriters that need access to index statistics somehow. Yeah, so something that you know from the index. And then you have cases where you say, oh, I better rewrite outside the search engine. And maybe it's the deployment, but could also be, I have a huge fat neural network that informs my query rewriting. I don't want to do this inside Solr. So we have this pros and cons, and we have this in many places when it comes to search, like learning to rank. Do you do this using a plugin, or do you do this outside? And I think what I like about the approach is that Johannes laid out. To some degree, you can mitigate this question and say, as this only sends the query object model over the wire, I can still continue rewriting inside the search engine. Yeah, so maybe I'm lucky and it's the right place to do this later in the rewrite chain. But still, I think it's quite flexible and powerful, but it cannot solve all the problems. Yeah? So, and I think there's a good reason why we have been so reluctant to doing rewriting outside the search engine for such a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, but for especially, yeah. So I agree. So in general, it's a disadvantage not to have direct access to Lucene for a couple of purposes. Yeah, but I think in general, like I said, spell correction, rewrite, word break, you do not necessarily need product data access to for these cases. So they can also be solved in a different way. And for instance, I think all e-commerce companies which allow some kind of selling third-party products. Yeah, so something like marketplace. Everyone knows this from Amazon. They will not use term statistics because actually they misuse it. So So actually, all I know, irrespective who it is, actually they don't use term statistics. And finally, in the end, we had more problems in Solar to exclude term statistics. This was one of the, because it was rather annoying than helpful in some way. Yeah, but I agree. Of course, it heavily depends on the use case. But I'm wondering, maybe the most important term statistics is also not about big data. It's probably also about megabytes. It depends, I think. So, and then you can handle this in memory, for example. Yeah. Outside of the search engine.
Yeah, but I think this this question, how much pre-processing should be done inside or outside the search engine, will be around for the next years. At least it had been for the last years. So I think this discussion will still be around. And I think, Johannes, it's great to have your perspective on that you shared that perspective. And you also shared a GitHub link where you somehow explored that outside query rewriting with Quirky. So I encourage everybody that wants to participate on that to as well visit that GitHub repository and join the conversation about this there as well. All right, thanks a lot. If there is no further question on this topic, I know about Ani Jarhar, I hope I spelled the name correctly, who wants to share something about Quirky at OpenSearch. I hope this is correct, and I hope, Ani, you're there. Yes, great. There you are. I cannot hear you so far. I don't know whether it's my connection. No, Ani, we cannot hear you. Yes.
Give me 1 second, I'm just switching over.
We can hear you now. It works.
Now we can hear you. Yeah.
Come on.
All right. Great, Ani. So Spotlight is on you. And if you would like to share your thoughts on how to
Can you guys hear me now?
use and interact with Quirky, yes, we can.
Awesome.
You can share your slides and go along.
Perfect. So I have more of a live use case that I can talk through our documentation. I'll have a couple of slides to introduce the topic. Let me first introduce myself and how I got in touch with Johannes and how we've been catching up together. So primarily, my name is Untitled Chapter. I've been working in search for a long time. I think primarily it started with Solar 1.1 at Bloomberg. So at Bloomberg, the entire query infrastructure at Bloomberg and those infrastructure teams I used to manage. And since then, working around relevancy searches for the internal search engines at Solar and internal products at Solar, there were certain challenges that I always felt as we move these products ahead. Continuing on while working with OpenDistro and working for OpenSearch right now, my role currently is involving leading the query infrastructure teams here for working on query languages and improving the state of queries as the product matures. Let me share the current problem that we are seeing over and over and how the approach we're taking to solve it. And we'll definitely, the main purpose of this is share what we have, but welcome a lot more feedback to form the roadmap going ahead. I just want to share my screen and we can talk through it. Give me 1 second. We are new to Zoom. I need to give Zoom access for screen sharing. Okay, let's try this again. Cool. Can you see my screen? Yes, no, can you
Yes.
see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So let me just keep this simple and go from here. The idea is, while working at Bloomberg, we had a lot of developers inside the company trying to use search engine and query it. I think more than 1,000 developers were there around that time, where the common problems were when they tried to develop something historically from SQL or any other query specific language, they know how to query it is approachable, and they're able to test it very cleanly. So testing is not just writing a test case and validating, but also understanding the explain path and figuring out for each query if there's a change in between, the rewriting between. While debugging and while doing A/B testing, they understand what exactly happened and what are the differences in between to evolve it and change it further. So the goal that we're also keeping here is, as more and more developers and customers have been using relevancy-based searches, they are still a bit lost at how to get started. And when I get started, what are the ways when I could send a query in and start developing it? So the goal over here was, how do we add more tools which are already available in the world, plus extend it to support more functionality specific for relevancy-based searches. So currently what we have is JSON-based query DSL, which is really very difficult for a human to write in and memorize and work on top of it. Secondly, we have a lot of get post parameters that we also always have to shuffle around. And if we go beyond this, we have to write custom code in a programming language and introduce custom components where you can add some of these pieces. And you need all of this, plus also you need to introduce some synonym models, some scoring models, some synonyms. All of that combined, you have to use almost all of these options to get into one product search query or get into one query with a good result set that you want to present to your users. Just having a simple query doesn't work for a real production use case. With all of this together, it's super difficult for a new person to play around. And especially even for an advanced user, it is difficult for him to exactly know what happened in the query path. So considering that, we've been evolving slowly and steadily the state of query languages. I'm going to talk about what we have in our query language tier, the base architecture that we have set in, and then walk through a single path of a query where Quirky can fit in and where all these pieces can lie together, and give us a few examples of relevancy-based functions that we've currently implemented in the stack. So first, the query core is built into a plugin today. We call this plugin the Sql Plugin. The name is a misnomer by now. The query core is simply language agnostic. From an architecture standpoint, I'll share all the links in the comments after this. From an architecture standpoint, most of the work is divided into, let me just increase my screen size, into 3-4 components. The top layer is an Antler parser currently. We used to use the Druid lexical parser earlier. We moved away from it and are completely onto MySQL 4 Antler. We have multiple languages. One is SQL. We also have a pipe processing language, which I talk about. So these are language heads. And these language heads are implementation details, which surface something to the user. And below it, the core functions and the core functionality is completely isolated. The semantic analyzer is mostly a validator. The semantic analyzer is a place where we can run a rewriter. This rewriter currently runs inside the engine. We use it for a lot of log analytics workloads or some other workloads that we run currently in the product, where different language heads can attach onto the same engine, which have different grammars. The main part in between is the query builder and the query action builder. It's query planner and the action builder. Now, from a journey for a single query, we have a clean separation between the logical plan and physical plan. And in between this, currently what lives is a rule-based optimizer. And we are slowly POCing and working towards adding a cost-based optimizer over here. The goal of this approach is separating most of the query details from actually running it. So as far as you write a query, no matter how complex it is, the way we optimize it in the engine to run it, that should be really a business logic for the user to think about a query. And the engine part of it completely takes care of performance characteristics of how the query is run across a cluster. And this slowly is also going to support cross-cluster search. For now, the kind of semantics that we support currently follow most of the SQL grammar functions that you are used to. Some of the SQL grammar functions are basic expressions, most arithmetic expressions, and recently we added a major feature where we support arbitrary depth of complex evaluations and arbitrary depth of complex SQL where and nested clauses. In the interest of time, we support complex queries like where, nested queries, a lot of SQL functions, over 30 plus SQL functions. The core goal that we are keeping now is how do we expand on full text search functions? For full text search, currently, we support basic operations like match query, multi-match, query strings, match phrases, and score queries. A simple query in the where clause, or these can be used within functions, can be evaluated to complex DSLs. This is an example of a match query. You can evaluate the match queries, multi-match queries, string clauses, and this internally takes Lucene grammar, and match phrase queries. Now, some of these extensions which you are seeing over here are implemented as functions. And these functions are like custom functions. You can extend them fairly easily. You can write your own functions and keep on extending what combinations you want over here. But the primitives over here include the query DSL primitives. But on top of query DSL, we have a compiled Java expression language, which we push down into Lucene for execution. And you can leverage most of the compiled execution phase also to build your own custom functions and push it down. When you see the entire query tree of how this thing is running, let me just run one part. This entire complete plan is you can start a query directly at the language tier, and there is already enough IP in the world with SQL-based query rewriters. So the path we wanted to think about is we have two options over here. First, you think about standard SQL-based query rewriters which are available in the industry and use them at top, and that could leverage how query rewriting and other operations can go into the query itself by extending some custom functions. Second part is in the semantic analyzation layer, we could directly embed Quirky right in there and think about how internal rules can expose query rewriting at that tier, but we support standard SQL semantics like synonym functions in SQL, synonym lookup with aliases in SQL, and make it easy for the user to present itself. The plus side over here is when you have the relevancy functions and the relevancy logic plus the extensions to it available in conjunction with window functions, rank functions, sorting, and other things in SQL, you can use this and present it to the users at a very easy to use format and a language. Plus, we support standard extensions with JDBC, ODBC, REST endpoints, Python DB API endpoints, and it works seamlessly with Tableau, Power BI, Excel, Apache Superset, and you can get more visualization extensions to debug and visualize how your queries are performing, and build more and more people and extend this to a larger community who can start using and adopting relevancy searches as their primary use case for doing work. The main goal that we're seeing is not just people using search engines for website search, or not just people using search engine for e-commerce search. There is just too much information nowadays. So even standard database lookups are slowly trying to use relevancy in their day-to-day life to get relevant information out. So these are database developers who just don't have enough horsepower, or they need more support from precision and recall type techniques to get data surfacing out there to their users. And this is where how SQL as a language can sort of promote a large set of users and exponentially increase the rate at which we get adoption to developers and start building test-driven development practices. This is most of my talk for SQL. As an end point, I just want to introduce one more RFC. This is the RFC for pipe processing language, which is built on the same language core. The same language core works on Elasticsearch, but it is also structured to work on object stores or federated stores itself. Every single piece of work and everything I've showed is in this particular repo. I'll link out all the links in the chat, and let me know if you have any questions.
Great, thank you, Ani. So is there any questions that we can have, or you want to have to Ani? Renee just came up with Ani for you. Just for clarity, is the SQL-based DSL thought as a replacement for the standard Elasticsearch DSL? Can you clarify on that?
Nothing is changing. No, nothing is changing. This is an extension plugin.
Okay.
It works alongside it. There are certain leverage benefits that we leverage from the DSL which are used over here. And anything that we do on top of it as part of compiled expression languages, which will be in the future used for schema on read and other functionalities, will be pushed down to the DSL. The DSL always remains, but the SQL tier work across the limitations of the DSL with multiple indices, support for joins, and various planned cost-based pushdowns.
Great, Ani. That gave you some love from Uwe, saying the SQL integration in the open search looks much better than what's plugged on top of Elastic and Solar. And also Renee finds that great. So my question would be, how do you see that connected to the framework and the product you're having with Quirky? So we're in a Quirky developer day today.
Yes.
And you've shown the DSL extension for OpenSearch. So how does it connect from your perspective to?
So the idea that the core functions that get into the language spec would be primitives. And those primitives can be user expanded by custom functions. But initially, when users need value add, query rewriting is a very important part of it. And when they need to use this, how do we use this? Instead of rebuilding everything, we were evaluating Quirky and working with Quirky developers to think and understand and learn more about it, and see which tier of the query analyzation chain do we support semantics to include Quirky functions, or does Quirky work on top, and then evaluate how it moves ahead as a rewriting set of features available on top.
Great. Thank you.
Just as raising a hand and a comment. So what I like is that this somehow involves a query execution structure that has a predefined place for query rewriting. So what we're doing with Quirky at the moment is we try to plug in here and we try to plug in there. and hope that nothing breaks Quirky at some point. We're pretty sure we can always work around this, but it can be an effort. And what I like about it is having a systematic place for rewriting. So that's great.
So this came from a different requirement that we have. We work with a lot of different products that have been building their own languages on Elasticsearch and adopting the usage of our SQL platform. And SQL engine is very generic. You can install it anywhere in any version of Elasticsearch OpenSearch. It just works. And we've kept as a goal, we're not going to go away from ANSI standards for SQL. So we don't deviate from our ANSI standard to break SQL, but we can extend it. So as we comply with all other BI tools, that just gives us more and more users. And the extensions of it adopt and enable these users to use more relevancy search functions, log analytics functions to just involve more into how new developers today are going to use it. And the next generation of functions will be more into machine learning functions where we can add model usage directly within the language.
Great. Sounds like a very sophisticated and awesome roadmap that you introduced there. So I'd love to see that being integrated into the open source search stack. Thanks a lot, Ani, for presenting that. And
sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
With us.
Which open source stack did you mention?
Oh, OpenSearch. OpenSearch.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
Yeah, OpenSearch. Sorry. Okay. Thanks a lot for being with us. So if there's no further questions for Ani, and then I think we have some last short talk from Johannes. Want to share some thoughts on rewriting with a graph structure. And I'm happy to spotlight you. Oh, you did it yourself. Great.
You see and hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, hello again. Yeah, there's something additional despite rewriting outside of a search engine, what I'm more and more thinking about, because actually, yeah, somehow we have, yeah, somehow we have at MediaMarkt extended the limits of Quirky to some degree, and yeah, finally, I think, yeah, I'm thinking about different approaches of how the restructuring actually of queries can be done. So in general, Lucene, Elasticsearch, Quirky, Solar also to some degree, they all consider queries as a tree. So for example, that you have those compound queries, yeah, and you can nest other queries into it. Actually, in the last talk, I talked already about how you so about the combination of term queries, of Boolean queries, and so on, and they are all modeled as a tree. So, and in Quirky, it's also modeled as a tree. So everyone is doing, every application is doing it like this. And I see some limitations there. At least I see a lot of complexities coming up if you model queries as a tree. And I would like to share these thoughts. So let's say we have some kind of, we have a user input mini and notebook. So what we do first is we embed this in a must clause, of course, because we want to be the query as precise as even possible. Many people do it like this. And let's then say we have a configured synonym for mini notebook, and this is ultrabook. So what we could do, of course, actually, this is the most obvious approach. We could nest the must clause we have here already into a should clause and put ultrabook also into it. Then one of those two clauses, either the must clause or ultrabook, must match in order that a product is returned. So, but actually, this is what I call the nested approach. There's another approach, and this is the repeated approach. And this is that you do the same, but finally you do not nest the must clause, but you keep the must clause and you embed the terms in the term queries or the terms in the must clause into a should clause, and you will add ultrabook as a synonym in a repeated manner to the respective terms. And from a logical perspective, you achieve here more or less the same. Finally, the repeated approach is what Quirky does, because the reason is that this makes it actually, by doing so, we do not change the base structure of a query. This is the first. And second is, if you are modeling queries as a tree, and for example, and you have combined or overlapping synonyms or multi-word synonyms, so multiple words to multiple words, you will anyway at some point start to repeat clauses. So actually, by modeling query as a tree, there's almost no real way to avoid repetition of repeating clauses. So, and this has a couple of complexities that comes with it. And actually, I will now show you what Quirky is currently not capable to cover. Finally, a complexity comes into place if we combine synonym and delete. If we combine synonym and delete rules, so unexpected behavior can occur. So, for instance, we have a must clause with mini and notebook again. So, and now we have the synonym ultrabook. So the term ultrabook is added to both terms with a should clause as shown above. So, and now we delete mini. So we delete one term. So this means that we remove one term out of the clause here, and what is remaining is a should that encapsulates ultrabook, and a should that encapsulates notebook and ultrabook. So, but this means that actually notebook is not useful, it's not used anymore, because ultrabook becomes anyway mandatory. So this is a problem, because this is an unexpected behavior. Maybe the search manager wants to delete the term mini and replace this with some kind of filter function, some range filter for size or something. But finally, only ultrabooks will remain in the result set. So, and the solution is obvious. We simply need to remove the entire clause. Actually, we need to remove the repeated clause here. But finally, this will not work for other cases. So for example, a search manager, and this is something I also see frequently, search manager might add a synonym like ultrabook as before and delete both mini and notebook. So actually, the synonym and the delete might be used as some kind of replace statement. So, and this is covered properly currently for Quirky. Because what Quirky will do is it removes the terms out of the should clauses, and what remains is ultrabook twice, which is not painful, because actually it's a bit redundant, but it's not painful because the search will work correctly. So, and if we now say we simply remove the entire clause, if we remove a term, then actually nothing would remain here anymore. So actually this again requires a different handling of the rewriting. So this is also not suitable. So you not only need to keep track of what is repeated and what not, but also what remains in the query and what does not. So there's a lot of complexity here handling these repeated terms. And they become additionally complex. This becomes additionally complex if we consider how rewriters interact with each others. So let's now assume we have the same input, but with a white space between note and book. So we have a word break case here. But finally, the nice word break rewriter in Quirky, it will identify, okay, actually this is a word break, so I add the notebook. But it will add this as it would do for a synonym. So it would keep the split one, because it's not always, sometimes there are many cases where both is a proper word. So for example, e-bike can be written together, can be written separated. So it's both valid to some degree. So and this is why the word break rewriter will always handle this as some kind of synonym. So what actually results then here in the query is that we still have the term mini on its own. This is embedded in a should clause finally with note and notebook, and here a should and with a book and notebook again. So notebook becomes a repeated term. So now we have a subsequent step after the word break rewriter. And we say that mini notebook is more or less the same like ultrabook. So we again add this synonym. So, but actually, and what Quirky will not do is finally, as it does not keep track of the repeated terms, will finally that it will not add the ultrabook at the last at the third clause. So it will also identify the clauses the clauses that are next to each other. So here we have mini and here we have notebook. So this Quirky will identify properly and will add the ultrabook as a synonym as it does in a regular way. And finally, this is also a good example why this repeated approach is powerful, because you simply can add this and it will work fine. But in this case, finally, it will not identify that notebook here is repeated again. So in this special case, actually, this will again be a bug, because ultrabook will not be a synonym to mini notebook in total. It will still remain either book or notebook to be made to be existing in the product. So I could give you a lot of more examples. Finally, I think Quirky does its job very well, to say it like this. Yeah, you know, it tackles a lot of stuff that actually is not at all handled by Lucene. So it's much more precise than Lucene synonyms, for example. But unfortunately, query rewriting is unlike regular software. Actually, in regular software, it's like you cover 80% with a simple logic and 20% with a complex logic. For query rewriting, it's like you cover 30% with a simple logic and 70% are edge cases. So you really must you need to like pain if you tackling these issues. So what can we conclude here? So the repeated clauses complicate the handling of synonym and delete interaction, rewriter interaction, but also what is a subsequence if we have a repeated term? Is, for example, in this example, is ultrabook or ultrabook note, is this, or ultrabook notebook, is this a subsequence for subsequent lookups? And finally, what is also very difficult, I have not tackled this here because this is even more complex, is that it's very difficult, and Quirky currently does not do this, to define rewriting action across different nesting levels. So if you have multiple terms to multiple terms, you need more nesting. So, and applying synonyms across different levels of nesting is also very complex. Yeah, so we have some unexpected side effects, and finally, these things need to be considered when implementing custom rewriters. And this is why finally implementing custom rewriters really has high barriers right now, because you will always need a strategy how to solve this. So Quirky currently does not encapsulate actions on the query tree. But anyway, finally, if we think about a little bit again and ask ourselves, is it really the best way to use a tree here, where we need repeated clauses from the very beginning, finally? Yeah, then maybe we might come up to an idea that it's probably way easier to understand everything and to add and to remove terms and to handle synonyms and word breaks and stuff like this, if we simply consider a query to be a graph that has a dummy starting node, and finally every term there is a node, and a product. Finally, this at the end of the rewriting pipeline, this graph is transformed to a tree again, but the subsequent this needs to be done because Elasticsearch, Lucene, and whatever, they require you to define a tree. But finally, for the subsequent rewriting action, we temporarily could consider the query to be a graph, because this has implications like, for example, the word break rewriter might identify notebook to note and book to be a word break, and add here notebook simply as a node after mini and before the ending node. So as an alternative way to achieve the full matching or the full terms through the graph. So, and then we might have the synonym like ultrabook, and we simply add ultrabook for an alternative for the path mini and notebook, and then we simply have here ultrabook. So, and the final step would be like we did before, that we remove now the mini, And what then remains is the notebook, then splits the notebook together and the ultrabook. So this actually, finally, is also a way, of course, in the end, as I already said, this needs to be transformed, but the way until this, the final transformation happens finally could be solved like this in a much easier and more transparent manner. So I think, yeah, considering the query as a graph makes it's not only easier to handle, but also makes the rewriting easier to understand, because this you can explain easily to search managers. So to every search, to business people. And this also helps to avoid repeated clauses. Actually, you will not have those side effects. And okay, yeah, I have something again. Yeah, finally, sorry, this is a mistake in the slides. Finally, I think the modification of queries should be encapsulated out of rewriters. So rewriters should focus on their respective business logic and not on the query structure. So they should simply say, for the following subsequence like note and book, I apply an alternative, or for mini, I apply a delete. But the extraction of those subsequence to do lookups, or the modification of the graph or of the tree should not be part of a rewriter. So I think like this, we could add a bunch of rewriters within a very short amount of time. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Johannes. Thanks a lot for the great example. And I think as well, it's very cool to have that in-depth perspective of somebody who's such experienced with a Quirky and customize a Quirky with custom rewriters. So again, thanks a lot for that. We got one question from Dominic. Dominic, I would just like pass over to you. Maybe you can just ask the question yourself.
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks for the insights, Johannes. I think this is, or I tried to wrap my head around it.
It's quite complex, I know. Yeah.
I have
10 minutes.
I only like one question arose with your example you showed in the beginning, and also you close with so you have the mini notebook. Then as a search manager, I see, well, that's a synonym for ultrabook, because these terms mean exactly that, or I say so. And then I just asked myself, what's the case for a search manager to then want to remove a term or a token, so mini, from something that in its nature was a synonym for another word, because then you change the meaning of it. And then some synonym can't make sense anymore. So I thought, is this a real case?
Yes, this is a real case, and I see this quite frequently. You know, the problem is that mini might not be maintained for every notebook. So search managers frequently will not want to mini to be a criterion for a small notebook to match. So finally, of course, you would not do it like this. Yeah, you would not do it like this. So probably you will apply an additional filter or an additional boost, or maybe you will simply boost ultrabooks or stuff like this. But finally, I see this quite a lot, that actually you have rules with an input where a synonym is applied and a delete in combination. So this is definitely is a real case. Yes, I think this is, I kept it short here to keep the focus on the relevant parts. So normally it would not be done in that simple way, but all those cases actually already led to discussions in our company. Yes. So actually, I've not invented something that is not that I have not seen in reality.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Thanks to both of you. Yeah, I think it's always interesting to see like the importance of specific use cases, to have a perspective on that. But Johannes, great that you highlighted that for this specific situation. We are now in a verge of moving over to Ask Me Anything session. So just some housekeeping notes right now. We will continue with the MICES talks at 20 to 5. So 20 to 5, we're going to continue with the talks. And we will, the Quirky core team, we will remain in this Zoom session for an Ask Me Anything session. So if you have any further questions or you want to bring up a topic that you want to discuss with the three of us, or I see a lot of other contributors and users of Quirky as well. So be in the community and discuss those questions. Let's use the time till we proceed with the talk to discuss those questions. And I would further like to encourage you to join the Quirky dev channel within the e-commerce Slack that you can find with the MICES.co/Slack link. I will paste them into the chat here as well. In that channel, we discuss a lot topics and features and ideas around Quirky development. So this is yet another great place to stay in contact with the community and with the development that's going on there. And if you just want to hang around and chat a little with your search fellows and friends, there's also the opportunity to visit the spatial chat that we introduced yesterday. I will drop that link as well. So yeah, let's move on to the Ask Me Anything session. And remember, 20 to 5, we continue here in this Zoom call with the next MICES talk. All right, so we've heard and learned a lot today, various aspects regarding like the current state of Quirky, and actually very different ways and approaches to use Quirky, and in some cases SMUI as well. So do you see something, would you like to bring something up and discuss with the community basically?
Or ask the most simplest question. So does it work, or what is this or that?
I could start with the question, and since also I heard that there's a lot of people here joining that are maybe trying to figure out whether or not to use Quirky at all, or to see if it works. So we have it since a little while, and I wondered, I just don't really know how it works. I would be very happy to kind of see a meaningful rewriter chain combination in place, and why we do it like that. So for instance, you have the common rules we saw, we can then create rules with the synonyms and so on. And then there is this replace rewriter also. So should you like normalize terms first, then put the synonyms later, and then put the word break after, or should it be in another order? How does it work? Really, or how does it work well?
Yeah, I don't know who wants to take this. I think overall, you pointed out the 3 most important rewriters. So I think the common rules rewriter is the one how people get in touch with Quirky, and I think that does the rewriter that does the heavy load of applying rules. And to make this rewriter applicable even further, I think it definitely makes sense to normalize the input before that. So the replace rewriter that does this normalization should definitely be configured in the rewrite chain before the common rules rewriter. And then we have the word break rewriter, and I think it somehow depends on what you put into your replace rules, whether you apply the replace before the word break or after the word break. I think I would somehow apply the replace at the very beginning, because then you have a higher likelihood of matching terms in your dictionary in the word break rewriter, and then go to the replace rewriter. On a related note, you can configure more than one replace rewriters. So sometimes we split off replace rewriters that do, prefix matching or deletes before everything else. So that's a more specific setup. But apart from this, I would say replace before word break and then common rules. I don't know how you configured it, Johannes, in which order?
I'm sorry, I was a bit lost now.
Okay.
Normally you would do the replace first, then the word break, and so I would always do the replace rewriter first, because replacing terms also means that you sometimes have to throw things away. So, for example, if you have alternatives in your clause, finally, then this might be thrown away. Otherwise, it might have strange side effects. So I recommend always to use the replace rewriter first, because a replacement is some kind of hard operation. So, for example, if you have a repeated clause somewhere, and then you replace something within the clause and you do not remove the repeated clause, and this can have very strange side effects. This is why it simply throws everything away.
Thanks a lot.
Always use it first.
Cool.
Okay, if there's no further question, I think we can just call it a day for this first Quirky user meetup.
There's Gennady.
Okay.
I think it's all right to just unmute and ask the questions, but I will highlight that question right now. So how you find new rules from query log, and I think this has a lot to do with the search management process in general. So we in different projects started to somehow standardize the process, but it's still up to the situation you're in. But obviously, like a very good source of insight is zero results, where you probably find like synonyms that you can put up and come up with. As well, you might find weaknesses in the search algorithm, matching algorithm itself, but at some point it's just synonyms, and zero results are a very good source of intel for that. And there's as well a lot of approaches that try to figure out like weaker performing queries, but that is more difficult. Like from a CTR perspective or NDCG perspective, to like find outlying searches where you can maybe work with a synonym as well to help improving those queries, or this is something where you would like to boost or penalize specific documents. At least in e-commerce, it works often like that. And there's a lot of misspellings that you find as well, which is a good source of intel. So basically, yes, it's query logs or analytics. If you have a simple setup in place like Google Analytics, search tracking, you can also work with that and try to find candidates for queries to improve with rules?
Thanks for the answer, Paul. But is it easier to maintain this kind of, if you even talk about 0 results, right? So it can be thousands if a search engine is quite big. So is it, is Querqy is for more medium size, but it looks not, it looks like.
So what you normally have is a shorthand of very frequent queries, and and this gives you a coverage, I think, almost of, I don't have the numbers in place, but it's often like, let's say 10-15% of your queries accounting for 50% of your traffic. So it's worthwhile focusing on the shorthand of queries. And also, I think we heard this yesterday, often sparser queries, long-tail queries are modifications of queries that are more frequent. And the way Quirky works is if you do not define that this is the exact query that you match, it will also say, okay, let's say notebook black, and you have a query for notebook, a rule for notebook, it will always also be triggered if notebook black something comes in. Yeah, so the coverage is quite high. And I think, Paul, we showed this last year in the Chorus workshop. I think it was after a year of work of a person who worked, let's say like 50-60% of her time on that project. We covered like 63% of the traffic with rules. Yeah? And in that project, we're definitely struggling to apply learning to rank to get better than what we do in the rules. Yeah, so it's worthwhile, definitely. And I would say many of the large e-commerce companies invest into this, and it's worthwhile.
Okay, thank you.
If there's there's another question. Okay.
Yeah, I think, Matthias, it's more than a question. It's a remark on Quirky and the setup. Maybe you can introduce that yourself, as you're a very experienced user of Quirky and Smooey as well.
Matthias is even
so
a commenter. Let's mention that.
I think it was more to Dominic's question about best practices. I think we said it's probably best to have the replace rewriter first, then the decompounder, and then the manual rules. But yeah, in practice, if you chain these rewriters, you have the challenge to keep in mind or trying to understand what's actually going on. So one challenge is if you have your rules, you need to keep in mind that some of your input terms might be already replaced by the replace rewriter. So we had the case where we used the replace rewriter to put plural and singular, or stem plural to singular forms in the replace rewriter, and then for select terms, and then in the rules rewriter, these terms, of course, wouldn't appear. So if you have an input term for a plural form there, that rule would never be applied. And I think, being able to trace what's actually happening in Quirky is still something we still need to tackle. And which I think is definitely something that would be helpful for search managers.
I think I absolutely agree, and I'm happy about a recent pull request that improved the logging for the replace rewriter. And I think it also goes along a bit with the improvements on making writing rewriters more easily, so that we could also say, add this if it's not there yet in the query. Yeah, so become more compact, more aware of the query that we're finally creating, and trace it. Yeah, Matthias points to his visualization for a very bad badly rewritten query. So many steps did the same thing, and it grew quite large.
One more question to that regarding SMUI. Paul, maybe you can answer that. I thought there was a SMUI visual concept kind of to show replaced stuff. No?
Yeah. So you can start SMUI in a mode where it distinguishes between replace rules and common rules, and you have like different icons on the left-hand side, because like maintaining replace rules is more like maintaining a dictionary of often it's misspellings, or it's very strong synonyms. And you can, if you configure SMUI that way, it will produce different resulting rules txt. One is dedicated for the replace rewriter that you're supposed to put in front of the common rules rewriter in your Elasticsearch or Solr rewriting chain.
Thanks. So I mean,
all right.
I guess this helps a little bit. Can I ask one more question, or are we out of time?
Sure. I think we have time for another question. So Dominic, go ahead.
It's another SMUI question, and I think it's more of a feature request, but also a question to the group if anybody experienced that before. We were thinking about using SMUI, and the question is a bit like how as a search manager can I know how many queries, and especially which, am I going to affect by writing a rule that matches the input, as Renee said before, notebook. So I mean, impact could be huge because maybe my digital online shop sells only notebooks, and basically I cover 100% of my queries. So that I could ask a question, is that good or not? So is there a way to see that in advance? Like query locks, plugin query locks and stuff like that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so the answer would be to like really have query locks available within SMUI. It could be used for a lot of other use cases as well. For as well use cases dedicated to visualize the impact of search management, which is very interesting. But one impact direction is the impact direction that you're supposing. So because Quirky is part of SMUI, it is available in SMUI, it could use the query log provided to SMUI and simply simulate the impact a specific management of a rule would have to a query log that might look different in the near future, but at some degree similar. So that would give the search manager at least the indication of how many queries actually will be affected or are likely to being affected. So I think this is a very great feature request, and I would encourage you to have that noted if it's not there yet. I'm not too sure, but I'm happy to discuss on that matter, because that's like you can do very cool stuff with it in the UI as well, right? To give like bubbles that indicate how many queries you're affecting, and maybe like showing a tooltip which are the highest frequented queries that you might impact with that maintenance of a rule. That's cool.
You broke off on my side a little bit exactly when you were talking about I should do something. I wasn't sure what that was.
Okay, no, just save it as a feature request on GitHub. I think if it's if there's no issue yet, I think that's a great thing, and let's further discuss that. I think that's a great feature request.
Just one more question, if it's possible. Yeah, it's about I think related to this thing that you mentioned, that it's possible, right, to upload query logs, right? If it's the case, then it will be interesting. Like I don't use Quirky or Smooth, but I think it will be interesting when, if, for example, you can upload logs and then create the rules automatically somehow based on log. But is it kind of considered somehow, or as a future?
I would say we have considered this thing a number of times, and I think we need a kind of an abstraction of this information we extract from analytics, because everyone uses their own analytics. But I think once it's there and once we have this, it will be very, very powerful. But I think for now it's just an idea. Yeah, so it's not something upcoming imminently.
Because, but is it why it's still idea? Because it's just complicated to implement, or is just
well, it requires focus. And I think how does such a project live? I mean, it's an open source project, and so we need to allocate time for it, and finally it means someone needs to pay for it, yeah, because otherwise I think it's too big to just do it on the side in your spare time.
And it makes sense like that, because there's also a trigger product that you have that feature implemented, right? So it's there in a context of a specific product, and it's being used.
Because I was thinking that, for example, if you start just using like embeddings model, right, where you can just simply upload the query log and train it, so it's already can give some meaningful results. So I was thinking, why it just maybe I don't know, maybe I can create that feature request.
Yeah, it's a great idea. It's a great direction, I think, as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Great, guys. It was really a pleasure to have that very first Quirky Developer Day. So much fun and really interesting to see and to get like the perspectives on the idea.